I like Norman Jayden. He's an interesting character with a problem that's a recognisable trope, and he injects some much needed self-awareness into a world that severely needs it. The ARI system that serves as the primary gimmick was not only a smart way to make crime scene investigations less tedious, but also makes the drug addiction make sense in that technology needs a destructive counterbalance. I can confidently say that out of all the stories in the game, Jayden's is by far the best of the bunch. But that doesn't mean it's good. Jayden starts his story by arriving at the recent origami killer scene. It establishes the killer's modus operandi. He ditches his victims by railroad tracks, while leaving behind an orchid and an origami figure as some sort of apology. It's during this investigation where we meet Lieutenant Carter Blake, acting as lead investigator of the case. He seems reasonable enough, although that'll take a sharp turn during a later chapter. If you explore enough, you'll find tyre tracks next to a motorway. So far so good. Establish the grim tone, a core gameplay mechanic is taught, and a core character is introduced. The next chapter is also fine. It has Jayden getting settled into his new office and establishes his blatant misuse of ARI, and soon its consequences. What I like about this chapter is the introduction of the gold watch, and I feel that this is helped by being given the opportunity to tie Captain Perry's necktie. It establishes a sense of normalcy while also making the conversation with Perry more memorable than the watch. I think it's a smart scene, since what would become a vital clue doesn't present the telltale marks of it being so. It's also a noticeable scene that you neither forget nor remember. Welcome to the second of ARI's core mechanics, reviewing the clues and files and being able to unravel possible connections. In reality, you're just mashing two clues together and hope a revelation comes out of it, but the fact that this was included in the game, alongside it being fully voiced, is admirable and gives an interesting twist in investigating a case. After completing your first round of reviewing, the tryptocane addiction starts coming through. You can either give in to the addiction, or make your way to the bathroom. The only problem I really have is the camera angles and editing deceptively suggesting that the bathroom is on the other side of the precinct, not to the left of you. And there's also some writing inconsistencies caused by a lack of attention to detail. Like, why does the captain say cancel his afternoon appointments during the evening? It's easily forgiven, and it was only discovered when I was reviewing the footage. Same goes for the sunlight beam coming through the window, even though it's raining. After that scenario, we cut to Ethan reporting Sean missing, and Jayden taking part in the initial questioning should you not take the tryptocane. Major problems start arising during Jayden's presentation, when Lieutenant Carter Blake starts exhibiting an uncooperative and rude personality, yet we're not really given a reason why he is like this. I can get behind the fact that he might not like that Jayden is from the FBI, but by his own admission, a child's life is at stake. It's interesting that the captain doesn't dismiss him for his hostile behaviour towards the special investigator, because I'm fairly certain he'd get reprimanded for his behaviour if witnessed by any other captain. The key information to take from this presentation is that Carter Blake is an asshole for no real reason, and that it takes about 6 inches of rainfall before a child is killed. You have 3 days to find the boy. Fortunately, you have one lead, Nathaniel Williams, and you might have noticed that there is no way in hell he could be the killer. You quickly pick up from Jayden that the origami killer is an intelligent person, and Nathaniel is a crazy person whose motives in life would be inconsistent with the crime. Nathaniel is preparing for the end of the world by hanging up crucifixes all over his apartment, and he barely cleans up. Someone relying on faith without effort doesn't strike to me as someone who could organise what Ethan went through. But that's okay, because it serves more as character reinforcement for Jayden and Blake, except whether or not you shoot Nathaniel doesn't matter and doesn't have long-term consequences. In fact, the only consequence there is for shooting him is just a variation of dialogue that Blake spouts out.
Why didn't you shoot?
If his rash behaviour was justifiable, then I'd be on board with Blake, like the exhaustion and guilt he feels over his failure to catch the killer is haunting him. At least following procedure would make his character more believable.
Call the cops.
Unfortunately, for most of Jayden's levels, you're going to have to deal with this one-note character, and witness missed opportunities for him to develop realistically. Take the next level, the covered market for example. On my first attempt, I was battered into oblivion by Corda before getting saved by Blake. It would have been an interesting moment for Blake, but instead it's used as a lifeline in case you fail the combat sequence. No consequence for your failure, just the false sense that Jayden is about to die. One wonders where the hell Blake was for the entire chase, and must have been shadowing Jayden considering he found him in the freezer. Also, and this is a minor nitpick, but who the hell brings live chickens to a market? So the investigation leads to nowhere, as presumably Nathaniel is let go and Corda has a solid alibi for the murders, but a major development is hinted at when none other than Grace Mars shows up to tell the police a story. It's a story that makes little sense for both the player and the character, a classic sign that this is David Cage writing we're dealing with. Now, I want to stress that in a police investigation, every word is pretty much analysed and taken into consideration. If there's even a slight discrepancy, then it's likely going to be a highlight for suspicion. This is why, when it comes to crime productions, special attention needs to be taken in order to make the crimes and questioning make sense. With that established, let's talk about Grace Mars's visit.
It was a few months back.
That directly contradicts what Ethan said about the separation, which was 6 months ago. The game takes place in October, and it is established in the game's art assets that all the killings take place during the fall season.
There is always a railroad line adjacent to where the bodies are found. And all the victims disappeared in the fall.
So when she mentions that the next morning there was a report of another child being found, why doesn't Jayden instantly dismiss the story as completely unrelated, since it doesn't match up with the recent victim's estimated death date? Ever heard of the term idiot plot? It's where everything in the story could have been solved if people didn't act like idiots and acted like humans instead. The reason why I'm harping on about this is because if it wasn't for Grace Mars's inconsistent and suspicious story, Jayden and Blake wouldn't have immediately gone to the shrink featured in Ethan's story and beaten the information out of him, instead of once again getting reprimanded after at least the third case of misconduct in under 24 hours. Blake comes to the conclusion that Ethan Mars is the origami killer. Awfully convenient that the story Grace told is based on cut content and matches up with evidence given under duress. So instead of making attempts to call Ethan in for questioning, Blake puts out an APB and says, outright, that Ethan Mars is the origami killer.
Yes, Ethan Mars is the origami killer.
Why not say prime suspect? What evidence does he have against Ethan? That he's been having blackouts since the death of his son? That he's been having visions of drowning during the summer period and not during the previous rainy seasons? Wasn't he in a coma when the first victim showed up? Actually, speak of the devil, it's awfully convenient that these chapters aren't labelled with a definitive date, otherwise the detectives would have looked up how long Ethan had been in a coma to see if he has a solid alibi. Hell, if I'm trusting the wiki, Jason died on or a few days after his birthday, which admittedly I can't find the source of, which would mean that Ethan's 6-month-long coma would give him a solid alibi for the first murder. Instead, Ethan Mars is a target for Blake, and they find him after he encountered the lizard trial. Cue Ethan and Madison getting away via the subway. Fortunately, Jayden isn't too much of an idiot to say Ethan Mars is the origami killer, though it's more to do with the fact that his life doesn't match with Jayden's psychographic profile, alongside the fact that it doesn't make sense for someone to kill 8 kids before going after his own son, instead of contradictory testimonies, but we're just harping on about that now. New evidence in the form of surveillance footage lands itself in Jayden's possession, of a car matching the tyre prints passing by the park in the time window when Sean Mars was kidnapped. Interestingly, the police don't investigate the building Ethan and Madison escaped from, which contains a tablet that likely has some evidence on it. They don't even examine the building records to find a lead. That's left for Madison and oh yes, I'll get to that soon. The evidence gives Jayden a small lead to a man called Mad Jack, who was known for stealing and selling cars, but a lack of evidence kept him out of jail for the case of this particular stolen vehicle. With no other leads, and now with Ethan's life on the line, Jayden heads out to find Mad Jack, although he is briefly diverted by withdrawal. So we arrive at the junkyard to have a talk with Mad Jack, and immediately I have a problem with it. So I get that Lieutenant Blake already has his eyes set on Ethan Mars, but wouldn't it benefit him if he found more evidence that would link Ethan to the crime? A sane jury would want to talk about how the boy disappeared and what car was used, so wouldn't tracing the car lead to more concrete evidence? And even if he wasn't looking for more evidence, it would be foolish for Jayden to go alone and without notice. Jayden's thoughts tell us that Blake wasn't in the office, but that doesn't excuse him for at least trying to get in touch with him, or bringing in a partner who can verify his actions and give him some security. Mad Jack has a history of crime, and he isn't scrawny. You could say he's pretty jacked. So yeah, Jayden's an idiot for going alone, especially since Mad Jack has a skull inside an acid bath. If you do try to leave without seeing the skull, Mad Jack will just tell Jayden that he sold the car to the killer, and that he plans to kill Jayden for snooping around. It's pretty pathetic writing, and while I do really like some aspects of this chapter, it does show David Cage's direction of thinking. Like, it's pretty obvious that the path he wants us to go down involves finding the skull, because it seems like the one that has more flow to it, instead of it nonchalantly admitting that, yeah, the origami killer has been here to buy a car and that Mad Jack got it sprayed for him.
One of your cop buddies asking too many questions. I had to solder up his little mouth. Now that car, she buff up real good. I painted her dangerous blue, in honor of the dangerous motherfucker that was driving her.
It would have been much better if he pointed the gun at Jayden and said something like, "You've been snooping around too much," or "You cops irritate me," or something to that effect, not admitting all the crimes he was hiding like he was reading it off a piece of paper. Regardless, you and Mad Jack fight each other until you come out on top. Jack is uncooperative at first, but does tell you that while he didn't know the man who bought the car, he did sell that particular vehicle. The origami killer requested a new car with false plates, before dropping a note to a guy called Paco, who, interestingly enough, is voiced by the same actor as Mad Jack. Pretty diverse portfolio. Jayden attempts to arrest Mad Jack, but the withdrawal symptoms interfere before he can arrest him. This actually leads into another neat design decision. If you complete the incredibly difficult button sequence, you arrest Mad Jack without a problem. If you fail to do so, you're knocked out by Mad Jack and forced to fight for your life in a sequence that I found to be really well done, even though the point where Mad Jack dies is almost comical. I like it because it shows an appropriate consequence for a failure to do an incredibly difficult action that doesn't involve the character instantly dying. The problem is Mad Jack's method of killing Jayden, and the difference in detail between the two paths. It's obvious that David Cage only gave the action sequence any amount of attention and care, because the other option, where you arrest Mad Jack, feels so jarring when you know that he's a monster. It didn't help that there was no real consequence in arresting him, so he can't admit to selling the stolen car to a guy who isn't Ethan Mars. How awfully convenient. In addition, why did Mad Jack try to dispose of Jayden using a car crusher, when it's clear that he has no qualms in getting bloody? After all, he admitted to killing another cop and dumping their body in an acid bath, so why not do the same to Jayden? To be fair, I initially wrote that I did like this chapter as a whole, but after analysing it, it comes with a caveat that I like it if you go down only one of 4 possible paths. So your only lead to possibly finding the origami killer is in a club called the Blue Lagoon, and as soon as Norman Jayden arrives at Paco's office, he finds Paco dead, but the killer is in the same office. The two of you fight, and if successful, the origami killer leaves. And yeah, this is the real origami killer, something you can confirm if you find the orchid pollen if you survive this encounter.
Orchid pheromones. The fucking origami killer.
So if the killer was trying to kill anyone who could possibly find him, why does he leave Jayden alive? He has a gun, which not many people can hear since Paco's security didn't suspect a thing, and he tried to kill him with a load of other weapons only seconds before. Kill him with the samurai sword! Well, the good news is that between Mad Jack's information, Madison's information that I'll get to later, and the fact that Paco was just killed, suggests to us, the player, that Paco was the origami killer's resource man. So tell me, why did it have to be the origami killer that personally bought the car from Mad Jack? Why couldn't Paco? That would mean if something went wrong, you'd only have a single man to kill in order to make the trail go cold. It's not as if the police are doing an effective job, given their priorities aren't aligned with any rational system known to real police departments. I mean, Paco could be the guy that did get the car, but this wasn't conveyed clearly if that was the case. Regardless, you're unable to get information on the man, but the security guard does give you a name, John. It's not relevant for the rest of this story. The crucial clues you get are the 2 receipts that Tiari's system won't pick up, a weapon that later transpires was supposed to be in the possession of the police, and the fight itself, since Ari recorded the entire fight. After investigating, Jayden leaves. Time is running out. Ethan Mars just escaped from police custody, Sean is close to drowning, and Carter is dead set on sending Jayden away. Fortunately, the clues I mentioned earlier do give you the crucial information needed to find Sean. On one hand, I really liked the foreshadowing with the Golden Watch, which I talked about earlier, but it's undercut by the fact that the camera lingers on the same watch for far too long, turning it from a aha moment to a yeah, we get it moment.
Gold watch. I'm sure I've seen this before somewhere. The watch they give for promotions to lieutenant. The killer is a cop.
Of course, since lieutenants get golden watches, it would be right to accuse Carter Blake for being the killer, and you have that option, although it's an option that's more or less pushed onto you. You don't have to do it, and thankfully the game gives us the option to not go through with it. If you do go through with it, it doesn't end well, and effectively the Jayden story is over. But if you investigate further, you find the one person who not only has the watch, but also lives close to the gas station that matches the receipts. Those receipts being the crucial clue was actually pretty good, and while I do complain about some aspects of Jayden's story, the investigation sections where you piece together the clues are something I genuinely enjoyed, even if the control scheme is a little arduous. However, even with the investigation aspect and the results you can get from it, what kind of killer directly earns the property they commit murders in? Especially considering they've got someone under their influence who could own it under their name. Not only that, we established that the origami killer was using the name John to accomplish some specific things. So why is the warehouse holding Sean and the flat he lives in owned under one name and not the 2 separate names? Think about this. If Paco had been a suspect in the case, and it was established that Jayden doesn't buy Ethan Mars as the killer, how much more sense would it make for Jayden to look at Paco's properties and discover that one of them would fit his hypothesis? You could have used the knowledge you gained throughout the game in regards to locations and figure out the most probable location Sean is held in. Unfortunately, what we are left with is the location of Sean about 2 seconds after discovering which police lieutenant is the origami killer.
Cop. There's only one cop in that geoprofiling zone. Gotcha. He owns a warehouse on the docks. If I'm wrong, Sean Mars is dead.
With this knowledge, Jayden leaves to find Sean. Jayden's story is by far the most interesting and the least flawed perspective in the game, but that is down to the fact that the story and gameplay is a lot more engaging. The detective aspect where you find clues is rough since it was one of the first few games to implement a system like this onto consoles, but jumping between this game and LA Noire isn't that jarring. It helps that Jayden's story drags us into more interesting situations, despite it competing with someone going through budget jigsaw trials, and was able to be complicated in the investigation's presentation without it getting too complex. But it's bogged down by some of the same things that affect Ethan's story, mainly that the writing is led by David Cage. Character motivations and actions make little sense, dialogue is very stilted, and the game's events hinge on every single character, Jayden included, having some sense of idiocy. Like I said before, it's the best story of the 4 characters, but it's far from good. And since Jayden's story has been completed sans the last level, let's move on to Scott's story.